Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining today's webinar. My name is Alexis Batulis with Columbus, and today we have a special presentation for you on using macros in Dynamics GP. We started the call by putting everybody on mute, so if you have any questions during today's presentation, please use the question box on the upper right-hand side of the screen to ask any questions that may come up. At the end, we'll have time for a Q&A with our presenter. Please stick around at the end of today's presentation to hear more about the Part 2 follow-up webinar to this session on advanced reporting in GP on September 1st. Finally, we are recording the session and we'll be sending a link to all attendees within an hour after this live webcast. Now I'm excited to introduce your presenter today, Roger Vanderloot. Originally from Grand Rapids, Michigan, but calls Sherwood, Arkansas home. After college, he completed the requirements to become a CPA and worked in public accounting for 7 years. From there, he moved into consulting and has been a Dynamics consultant for over 20 years. He began working with Solomon, now Dynamics SL, and then moved to CRM and Dynamics GP in 2000. He spends a lot of his time helping clients with automation and is certified in E1 Solutions, Smart Connect, and TIBCO Scribe Insight, and of course, Integration Manager. His background, that of being a CPA, and having also a technical background, gives him a unique ability to understand the needs of accounting and operations, while also being able to give the technical guidance to put together the best solutions to real-world problems. Roger has a wife, 6 children, and 10 grandchildren, and besides spending time with all the babies, he loves to get out on his motorcycle and enjoy the countryside. He actually just returned from a great trip on the open road to Michigan a couple weeks ago. So without further ado, Roger, I'll hand it off to you.
Thank you, Alexis. Good morning or afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I'm going to finish up Alexis' introductions for you by just introducing myself and my wife, and then I had to show off grandbaby number 10, who just arrived there, Zane Michael. And there's a picture of our bike. We were going through Illinois at that time, a little small town in Illinois. We took a picture on our way up and back, just had a wonderful trip back and forth going to see my dad in Michigan. We stayed COVID safe, of course. We wore masks, we stayed away from everybody, and then of course we kind of quarantined. Well, we're all quarantined now that we're back. So let's kind of jump into things today, and we're going to look at macros. What are they? What are they not? Some tips and tricks. We're going to do a couple of demos for you, show you some advanced features, and then hit your Q&A. So think about macros as pre-recorded instructions. They're unlike the integration tools, such as Smart Connect or Integration Manager. Macros can only do what's contained in them. They have both the data and the instructions in them on what it is they need to do. So unlike other integration tools, the data tends to live outside the tool. The tool has the steps to perform. Hey, I want to put this new customer in. We're going to put in a customer ID, a customer name, assign a class ID, put a payment terms on them, etc. And then you have data files that you can over and over again use those same instructions. With macros, you're setting a macro that's going to do the same thing every single time you run that macro. The data and the instructions live together. So, however, even though that, they can still do a lot of very important things. They can import data, they can post batches, run processes. We could even change companies with a macro, change between companies. But because of their limitations, there are some things they can't do very well. First of all, they don't handle errors well at all. When a macro errors, when something causes a macro error, it stops right there. It can't respond to the error and continue on. It stops. You now have to respond to the error, figure out what went wrong, go back into your macro, make the changes, and then continue on from there. They also are not dynamic. You cannot tell a macro to, hey, if you see option B, go this path. Otherwise, go down option A and stay on this path. You can't dynamically do things within a macro too easily. And then because of the whole error stopping and starting, they can't really pick off where they left off. So if you've got a macro that's fairly long and 200 records into 500, it errors out, you have to go back into the macro, find where it errored out, fix that data, maybe remove the 199 records that did go correctly, and then pick it back up again and go from there. Now, we're going to see at the end of this presentation a little trick around that, but in general, that's what happens with macros. If they stop, they error, you get to fix it, you get to pick up where you left off. So a few things to know about here. When you're doing recording a macro, make sure that you have the screen set up exactly where you want to start, exactly what you want to have in the macro. So if I'm going to record a macro that's inserting new customers, I'm going to want to have the customer maintenance window open. I'm going to want to have my cursor already in the customer ID field before I go up to tools, macro, record macro. I want the screen and cursor set up exactly where I need to be in order to get the steps recorded correctly. Additionally, don't click into things or tab into things that you don't want in your macro. Be specific about where you're going so you don't end up with extra instructions that you don't necessarily need. Because just remember, everything you click, everything you type, everything you do gets recorded in a macro. And so if you're recording, so say for example, even the customer macro, I start recording the customer name and I do a typo and I backspace over and I go back again. Literally all of that activity is going to get recorded in the macro. Now we can edit it out and we can clean it up, but you want to be as clean as possible when you're putting a macro together. Some other things to remember when you're editing a macro then are things such as how numbers and how dates and things like that will look. So in your GP system, most of your currency fields have a decimal point, 2 decimal points later. But when a number gets stored in a macro, it gets stored without the decimal point. We're going to see that in one of the examples here soon, where the number itself actually has 5 decimal places after it. And in order to store it in the macro, I've got to store it with 6 digits in order to get a single digit number. We've got to do that right. Date's the same thing. We don't store it with the date with the slashes in it. It needs to have the full 8 numbers. It can work with it can work with 6 numbers. It can do month, day, year, but it's best if you fill in the whole date. Account numbers also can be a little bit fun. They get recorded by segment. So even though you're looking at a field supposedly on a screen, when you're typing in that account number, you're typing in each segment in separate little spots, and in a macro, they get recorded as separate little spots as well. So lastly, if you can avoid using the lookup lists, stay out of scrolling windows. Lookup lists especially, and I'll give you an example why. If you take a look here at the payables transaction entry distribution window, you see down there, you've got your distribution lines. When a macro is dealing with a scrolling window, it literally is doing it by line number. So right now that screen has lines 1 and lines 2 filled in. If I want to put something on line 3, I literally have to instruct my macro to go to line 3 and do that. That also happens when you're doing a lookup window. So if I were to hit the lookup there for an account number and go down to the 5th account in the list and pull it back up, that's what would come back, and the macro would record that as I hit the lookup, I went down to line 5, I brought it back. It doesn't record the fact that it was a specific account number. It records the fact that it was line number 5. So if somebody adds a new account to your chart of accounts later, and you try to run your macro again, trying to get to that account, well, now your account's probably on line number 6, and you're not going to get the right account when your macro tries to retrieve it. So that's especially important with the lookup lists, customer lookup, a vendor lookup, account lookups, because those lists can change. The line number that your option was at probably moved, and try not to use the lookup list whenever you're doing your macros. The scrolling windows, they just require more programming. If you need to do distributions, just remember that you're going to have to program into your macro the specific line numbers that you're trying to get to in order to program into them. So some things, most of the time, when you have recurring import needs, a tool such as Smart Connect would probably be the best solution to do that. So, you know, Smart Connect, Scribe Integration Manager, those things can utilize a host of data sources. They can get data from text files. They can get it from Excel files. They can get it from websites. We can get it from SQL. We can get it from other database softwares. We can get it from an Access database. You may be converting from Peachtree to GP. We can talk to Peachtree directly with things like Smart Connect and import data in. So it's, and the nice thing there is that they still mirror all that GP logic when you're putting something in. So it knows whether or not that the customer ID can't be more than 15 characters and that the customer name has to be less than 60. And here's the valid list of class IDs and here's the valid list of payment terms. So it checks all that logic for you as it brings it in. So if you've got recurring kind of integrations, obviously these other tools do a better job of that than what macros can do. Macros are great for those one-off things. I need to get something in quick. There's also some screens, frankly, though, that just aren't supported by the other integration tools. I've listed a few here on the screen for you: sales tax details, payment terms, setting up users, actually running a posting, you know, maybe automating or running a certain set of reports. Now, granted, there's some other tools you can use in the system to automate some of those processes, but some of these screens do not have adapters for them to be able to import into. So sometimes when you have a lot of data import, the quickest way to get it in is to record a macro and to then merge the data in with it. So let's take a look at a real world example for us here. So I picked sales tax details for this. And so here's, in order to get this screen populated with a number of sales tax details, what we're gonna need to do is we're gonna need to record a macro for the window. So we're gonna open up the window, we're gonna put our cursor in the tax detail ID. We're going to start with tools, macro, record, give our macro a name, and then from there forward, everything I do starts getting captured by the macro. So I'm gonna type in the tax ID, I'm gonna tab, I'm gonna put in the description, I'm gonna tab through, I'm gonna get to the account number, fill it in, tab through, finally get down to the percentage, I'm gonna fill it in, tab off it, then I'm gonna go up to hit save, and then I'm gonna go back to tab to the tools macro and stop recording. Now I've got one time through the screen recorded. Once I do that, I can open up that macro in Notepad. I can take part of it, put it in Word, and we can do a mail merge with our data. And with a little bit of luck, we'll actually end up getting our sales tax details loaded into GP. So let's just kind of take a look at what that's going to look like. So here's our tax detail screen for us. And yeah, as you can see, we're going to fill that in. Make sure that is running properly. It is, good. So what we're going to start here with is, and forgive the demo, but the demos take just a few seconds to get running due to some issues with the recording. So I wanted to make sure that I actually put the demos in the PowerPoint so that if you wanted to review later, you could see what happened. And so they're not necessarily recorded live. So tools, macro, and then we're going to hit record. We're going to give our macro a name. I happen to already have one there. I'm just going to overwrite it. And then we're going to start typing in our data. So I'm going to put in the Arkansas tax detail ID, tab out of that field, put the description in, tab on through, get down to the account number. And part of the reason I recorded these because my demo system was being slow, so I figured to go much quicker for us this way. Get that account number typed in, tab through, and now I got to my percentage field. I put my 6 in, got to get all those zeros in there. And then, okay, I've finished everything I need to put down on the screen, so I'm going to hit save, and then I'm going to do tools, and then macro and stop record. Now I can go to Windows Explorer, File Explorer, and I can pull that macro file up. And I'm going to open it up in Notepad, and we'll just take a look at what this just did. So the first 2 lines tell us what version of GP we're on and then what window we started with. We started with the active tax detail window. And it walked on through everything we did down to the very bottom where it says, hey, I'm going to hit the save button. The last couple of move to lines there, you can see we had an extra one. We went one field past what we needed to get out of that tax detail percent. So I'm going to delete that out. And then we're just going to copy all of this and we're going to put this in Word. We're going to start up Word. We're going to start with a blank document. And we're going to paste that into our blank document. So now we can see our macro there. You can see where all of the data we typed in still exists. We're going to start a mail merge with doing letters. And then I need to select some recipients. So I'm going to use an existing list. You can type in a list, you can use, and here again, your list can be a text file. In my case, I have an Excel file already saved. I'm going to open it up. It's going to ask me which tab in the Excel file I want to use. I'm going to use the tax codes and I'm going to say, okay. I'm going to click on edit recipient list here a minute so you can see what we've got in this file. So I've got the columns here for the tax ID, the description, the 3 different segments for the account, and then finally the rate. Those are the fields we need to fill in. So now all we've got to do is just substitute out what we had typed in when we recorded the macro with our actual macro insert merge field. So there goes the tax ID field. We're going to now highlight the description and replace it with the merge field for description. Come down here and get the account number. And again, notice that the account number is 3 different pieces. So whenever you put account numbers in macros, make sure you record them by segment and don't put them all in one field in your merge. And then the last field here. Again, we are merging everything. If the account number needed to stay the same all the time, I could have just left those in there and not had to use mail merge fields. So if you have data that's going to be the same every single time, you can just leave it the way it is. Once we've got those replaced, we can hit the finish and merge, and we're going to edit the letters, and it comes up, but now it shows us our merged data. We can scroll through here. I scrolled a little quickly, forgive me for that. But you can see that we've got all the different ones ready. So I highlight the whole thing, copy it, minimize Word out of the way, and paste that back in here. And now my macro has all of those pages of information all set to go. I save the macro, minimize down here, and then go up to Tools, Macro, and Play, and then pick our macro that we just saved. And it runs through and starts putting those in for us. And it goes quick, and it errored on Arkansas. Well, the reason it errored on Arkansas, and this is one of the things that you get to do when you have an error, is notice that the based on field there is grayed out. When I first enter one of these in, that's a drop-down list and I have to select something. And the macro recorded us selecting percent of sales purchase. Now that it's been saved once though, that field can't be changed. And so when this tried to go through and do Arkansas a second time, it said, sorry, no, you can't change that field, it's already there. So that's what caused our error to happen. So here's what we have to do. We have to go back into our macro. We're gonna search for Arkansas and find where that was in the macro. It's right there. We already know that Arkansas is properly saved, so we can go down to the bottom of Arkansas and find where the next one is about to start up. There it is, the POL_Arkansas. I'll put our cursor at the beginning of that line and highlight to the top, leave the top 2 lines, delete them off, and now we're going to save this with the data that's already been recorded, done, and now we can go right back into GP. We're going to go ahead and clear the screen here. And then we're back to a blank screen, Tools, Macro, and Play. Run our macro again, and it finishes those off. Now, if you'd wanted to, when you did that edit to the macro, and I've done this a lot, I've had a few times where I've had to import hundreds and hundreds of records, and it errors somewhere down the line. I won't overwrite the original macro when I resave it. I will give it a -1, -2 on the end of it so that my original stays in place if I need to reuse it on another system, and my picked up ones go on from there. So that is so another that's our example of getting some data in. Another example might be I just need to reset all of my users' passwords. And this example is a little bit different because instead of the using mail merge to create the file with all the data, we're going to use SQL to actually write the macro for us. SQL is going to look at our users in GP, and it's going to say, okay, based on the users I see in GP, I know how to write the commands, and I'm going to create you the text file you need in order to go through and create your users. So I'm just going to kind of walk through these steps a little bit. So we're going to use SQL Management Studio. This one will run off the Dynamics database. There is a script that we can provide on this, and I can provide the script to anybody who needs it if you want to email me afterwards. You copy the output of the script and create a new macro. You go into GP, run it, and it resets all the passwords. Let's take a look and see how that works. So if we go into GP here, let's see if I can find SQL Studio here. There it is. So here's the macro that we have. We're on the Dynamics database, and this is the script that comes with this, and it's pretty easy. So what happens here is we declare something to go get our users, and so this SQL script I'm about to highlight. Let me highlight this for you a second. The selecting the users, that goes through and says in GP, hey, give me all the users except for Dyn SA and SA. And then it starts printing the macro, and then it goes through a loop where it's going to set the user ID and the password over and over again. And basically all it's doing is looping through this, writing this information out. So when we execute it, we end up with a formed macro ready to go. Hey, we're going to have Dave, and we're going to change his password. We're going to have Sue, we're going to change her password, and we're going to have BMI, we're going to change her password. And obviously we would never change our passwords to password1, but for our example, that's what we're going to do. Copy this, open up Notepad, and we can paste that in there, and then we're going to do a file save. And trick here, when you save your macro file, put double quotes around the name of the file. Notepad's going to want to put .txt on the end if you don't put it in double quotes. So by putting double quotes on it, when you save it, it won't try to append a .txt, and it'll be easier to find then when you're in GP to run the macro. So now let's go back over to GP to administration, go to the user window, of course, type in access for your system password, or if you happen to have a unique one, kudos to you. We're on the user ID field. We're good to go there. We can go up to tools, macro, and play. We can run our reset password, and saw it. If you're watching really quick, it went through those 3 users and changed them for us. So again, that's an example of how I can use SQL to actually build the data. And I'm just going to pop back to that screen. That's pop forward here. So changing companies is something that maybe people don't think about when they do macros. But recently, I was working with a customer who we were going through an upgrade, and they have 425 GP companies. So as you can imagine, there's a lot of things we like to do before we do an upgrade. We like to go through and we want to check trial balances. We want to do check links. There's a lot of processes and reports that we want to run, things to check inside the companies. And to do that 425 times individually was going to take me minutes or more per company. And so what I did is I recorded a macro of the steps and then merged it in with this switching companies piece, and was able to take what was taking minutes per company and knock it down to seconds per company, because the macro just flies through. And I literally probably saved myself 8 hours of time by not having to switch companies over and over and over and over again. Do that. Now I will point out one little thing here, and I've got it on the screen for you as well, that this number that you see here, this item number 1, that is not the company number. That is the Dexro ID from having put that in GP. So a lot of times they do tend to be the same, but that is the Dexro ID. So let's just kind of take a look at that example. So and again, for me, because I do a lot of SQL work, this is a fairly simple query. I'd be glad to help anybody with these kind of things if they need them. We're going to declare getting our companies out of GP, our Dextro ID and our company name, so we have our things to fill in, because again, what we need to have is we need to have which line it is and which company it is. So we're going to keep swapping those in and out. We then got the text that we needed to have for the first couple of lines, and then we go and we grab our first company and we put it in here. See, new company names, item number, it's going to put in that number and it's going to put in that name. Click the OK button, and then right below that is where you would then put in all of your other macro code that you would need to run company by company. So ideally what you do is you would have recorded a company macro, a macro things you want to do, and you'd have that macro set, and you could just copy and paste that into here, and then when this print macro command goes, it goes. And so what this looks like is it gets your new active window, changes your first company. In between these two lines is where all the other things would happen, and then it would basically rinse and repeat until you get through doing all of the various things. So hopefully everybody is still with me. I feel like this is going a little bit fast, but I want to just kind of hit on the highlights and show you how things will be done. This whole thing of using SQL works well with a lot of things. You know, if the data is in some other database, I mean, you can always, if you can get it out to an Excel file and use the mail merge technique, that is great. If you've got somebody with some SQL knowledge who can just build the macro for you, that works as well. So either tool works. Just a little plug for Shirlene, who's going to do the follow-up session for this on September 1st, I think Alexis said. That's going to be, she's going to show how using a lot of the smart list utilities can also help you with building the data you need for the macros. So she's going to build in and add smart lists to the equation as well. So what I want to touch on now is a little bit of some advanced tips and tricks a little bit. So there's a user on GPUG, Elvale. I want to give him credit, because the article that the next part of the presentation comes from, a lot of it comes from me seeing her article and going, hey, there's some neat things there. Let me pull some of those out. So you have to add the show advanced macro menu equals true into your DexINI file, and then you restart GP. And now when you go to tools macros anytime, you'll have an advanced menu which has a number of choices on it. We're going to take a look at some of those here now in a minute. When you get the email from us, if you need the link to this presentation or anything, let us know, and we'll be happy to make sure you can find this out there to see if you want to dig into more detail. That's what she said. So one of the things that it adds is a macro status window, and I'm going to go through it here on a slide, and then we'll end up actually taking a look at it in a minute as well. So it shows you what macro is being recorded if you're actually recording a macro right now. It can show you which macro is playing, and in this case, the example, there was a macro that was actually playing. It was this in this C users Leslie documents folder. That number 3 there, no user flash interface. So that is the magic button, we call it. Macros, as you saw, they went pretty fast. The ones that we just ran, we only put in a half a dozen things, you know, weren't filling in a lot of fields, so it didn't take a long time to run those. But imagine if I'd had to put in sales tax rates, you know, for even the state of Arkansas where I'm at. For me to get the state, county, city level details all loaded into GP is a few hundred lines of details. Then multiply that times, maybe I do business in 10, 12 different states. Well, frankly, at that point, you might want to start talking to us about Avalara. But if you want to take care of your own sales tax, being able to import those is going to be important, and it could slow down the more you're watching the screen redraw. So this no user interface flash turns off the GP trying to show you what's happening on the screen, and will at least double the speed of the macro as it's running in. So If you're running a large macro, use this option, get that turned off, and you'll find that things go much, much faster for you. Line 4, number 4 there, that jump to line, that lets me, so down at the bottom grid window there, you see some of the macro. And by saying jump to line, I can jump down to a line number in that macro. So say my macro was running and it failed on line 7,463. I can try to scroll down through Notepad and find that, or I can maybe search like we did. We searched for Arkansas and we kind of found what it was doing. But if there's not something that's going to be easily identifiable other than it just failed on line 7,463, by being able to put that jump to line in here, I can jump right to that spot in the macro file down below, see exactly what happened, and go. The next one there, that pause after line, that's kind of nice, because if I, say I have a really large macro, but I want to make sure it's going to work. So I want to just have it run the first 5 transactions and not all 5,000. I can tell it to pause after whatever line it is that's the last line of the 5th transaction. So by using that pause after line, it kind of gives me a way to test and debug without having let the whole macro run for the entire time. So box number 5 there to the right, the display, lines to display 30, that's controlling is how many lines are displaying in that grid box down here at the bottom. So again, I'm just going to reiterate that magic text box, that no user interface flash. That thing will really speed things up for you. Definitely recommend you turn that on when you do that. Of course, so let's take a look at what that looks like in GP. So I'm going to just use the General Ledger transaction screen to kind of show you some of these features. We'll pop that window up, and here's the normal GL transaction screen. If I go to Tools Macro, notice now at the bottom I have my advanced window, and there's my status window. And again, we just looked at this. There's nothing displayed here because I haven't started either recording a macro or playing a macro, but these would all be there. There's your magic no user interface flash checkbox. You want to make sure you turn that on. Some of the other things that are on this window are also pretty cool. The window dump. This is of all these tools, the one that's the uncoolest, because all it did, you're going to love this, it just takes a picture of the window and saves a picture of the window for you. So I'm assuming that that's nice if you're trying to document your system, but that's all it did. It just took a picture of the window. Not real helpful. The other tools though on this list can be quite helpful. So the field dump. It creates a little text file, and when we take a look at that text file, it's going to show us every field that's on that window. And notice that the line 1 stuff down a little bit farther here that's the account numbers, that's the scrolling window. So if we had 5 lines of stuff filled in, we'd have line 1s, line 2s, line 3s. It's showing you every different button, every different option, and those are the exact syntax that macros will use to identify those things. So especially if you're like borrowing a macro from somebody in the past, maybe you're going to have to update the coding a bit to match the new system. So that being able to dump those is nice. The menu dump is a little bit different in that it actually kind of dumps out all of the different menu commands that can happen, the file menu, the edit menu. So you get a quick look at what are all the menus that are available to hit here. So. And then lastly, there is a dump for a table dump. And this one's kind of neat because I can pick any table in the system to dump out to a file. Now, I didn't actually dump this one to a file. I'm just going to bring it up on screen for us. I'm going to pick the checkbook master just to give us something to look at a minute. Every table in the dynamic system is here. When you pick up a table, you start seeing every single one of the fields that's in it, how big they are, what they look like. If you put in an export file name there, you'll be able to export it out. So that gives us a good idea of what happens with the advanced tool. So So I talk fast because when I practiced this took about 45 minutes, and I am 10 minutes ahead of that time, but I have reached my question and answer time of today's presentation. Is there anything anybody'd like me to go back over, take a look at? Any questions you have? Be happy to answer them. I've got the question box open there.
We'll give a couple minutes and see
Yep.
if anyone.
I've never had anybody be upset because I gave them part of their day back. So that always works out pretty well. So Alexis, are we also including, when we send them the email of the recording, can they get access to the slide deck as well, or would they just request that from me later if they'd like to see the slide deck?
The slide deck we can send out. They would just have to send out a quick email, and we can turn that around pretty quickly.
Okay. Yep.
But within an hour, they should receive a link to the recording.
Recording, yep. Okay. Because I know I had a couple of links in the slide deck that would, if they wanted to look for more information, and with the demos, with the demo parts of it being recorded as well, that'd be a quick way for them to get to as well. So, Dwayne, thank you very much. I need to come visit you when COVID ever ends. I'm missing getting to visit any of my customers, let alone even my ones here in Central Arkansas. I've not been able to go see any of them. Well, one exception, I will confess, I have gone to see Moon Distributors here in Arkansas. They are our state's largest liquor distributor. You cannot blame me for wanting to go on site to visit Moon Distributors. So.
Alcohol is a disinfectant, Roger.
It is actually, Diageo, one of their suppliers, actually used the small little 750 ml vodka bottles and was supplying hand sanitizer. They were giving it out.
That's great.
So
wow.
Yeah, so that was nice. So besides getting my normal, whatever freebie I got that day, I also got my a couple bottles of hand sanitizer I was able to use. So good stuff. So.
That's great. Well, all right. If there are no additional questions here, I'd like to thank you all for attending today's presentation. We have a lot of free virtual events coming up this month, including a follow-up session complimentary to today's webinar. I will drop the link to these events here in the comments. We hope you'll join us again on September 1st with Charlene Sorensen. Let me send that link now.
Charlene won't talk as fast as I did.
She'll be presenting on how you, just as Roger explained, on how you can better save time with advanced reporting for Payroll Dynamics GP. We'll also be sharing this link in a follow-up email along with today's recording that you can share with colleagues. Again, if you have any questions, please reach out to our contact email, us-marketing@columbusglobal.com, and we can get you in touch with Roger if you don't have his information. And thank you so much, Roger, for giving us a great overview of using macros in Dynamics GP.
Thank you, Alexis. Thank you, everybody.
Our webinar. Thanks again, everybody. Have a good one.